welcome back to iSingPOP and another episode of Snug Stories. Today I'm going to read from Heroes of the Old Testament, written by me and my friends Leah, Jake and Sandy. This book is full of 12 amazing stories about heroes of faith that we read about in the Bible in the Old Testament. This evening, we read about 3 more heroes of faith: David, Elijah and Daniel. So grab a blanket, your favourite teddy, and snuggle down. We're going to read David first. Every giant will fall. David was the youngest of 8 brothers, a humble shepherd boy. He looked after his father's sheep, a job he did quite enjoy. David's people, the Israelites, were at war. The fighting lasted so long that their feet became sore. The Philistines had a weapon so big and so frightening. Goliath, a giant among men, over 9 feet tall, he laughed at the king. He would shout daily, "Choose a man to fight me, you cowards. If I overcome and kill him, you will be ours." The Israelites trembled. Who would they send? They needed a hero to put this war to an end. One day, David heard the mighty giant roar. Goliath was intimidating his brothers, which David simply could not ignore. Wanting to take back God's land, David marched up to the king. "I will fight the Philistine," he declared, hoping he would win. The king was flabbergasted, as David was far too small. If they had sent a small boy to fight Goliath, he would surely have killed them all. But David was determined. He had God on his side. Armed with a slingshot and stones, he headed towards the fight. As David approached Goliath, the giant collapsed into a laughing fit. "Am I a dog," he cackled, "that you come at me with sticks?" David replied, "You come at me with spear, javelin, and sword, but I come to you in the name of the Lord." Grabbing a stone from his bag, David swung his slingshot high. The stone was released and hurtled across the sky. It struck Goliath on his forehead, sinking nice and deep. The giant tumbled to the ground like a falling tree. The Philistines shrieked, "Let's get out of here as fast as we can." Terrified, they ran and they raced and they ran. David rescued God's people, even though he was just a boy. He was a hero. The war had ended, and the Israelites jumped for joy. Now we're going to read about Elijah versus the prophets of Baal. Following God's command, brave Elijah climbed to the peak of Mount Carmel and waited. King Ahab of Israel was on his way, and he was furious. 3 years had passed since Elijah stood in King Ahab's palace, declaring God's anger at the people's broken promises. Back then, Ahab didn't care. He and his people had turned away from God to worship a false god named Baal, who was believed to control rain. God had instructed Elijah to announce a drought until further notice. At the time, people had laughed, but there was no laughter now. The land was parched, devoid of water. Not even a hint of rain or morning dew had touched the earth since Elijah's words in the palace. Crops wilted, animals suffered, and Baal's prophets failed to summon rain. Desperation hung heavy. So when King Ahab learnt where Elijah was, he marched his soldiers across the barren land to confront Elijah and his God. As Ahab arrived, Elijah was surrounded by over 400 of Baal's prophets and priests. Outnumbered and encircled, Elijah challenged them. "Let's settle whose God is real. Build an altar, place your offering, and call on Baal to send the fire. I'll do the same for God. Whoever's altar is set alight first is the one true God." The surrounding priests agreed. In an instant, the prophets cried out to Baal, pleading for fire. They danced and they howled to get Baal's attention. Elijah just watched, mocking their efforts as they wailed throughout the night to no avail. Elijah, trusting in God's power, dug a trench around his altar. He then turned to some onlookers and asked them to pour jug after jug of water on the altar until the whole thing was sodden and the trench overflowed. Elijah then said to God, "Answer me, O God, so these people may know you." Suddenly, a fire raged down from the sky and ignited the waterlogged altar, evaporating all the liquid in the trench. It was a miracle. The people fell on their faces and praised God. Shortly after rain clouds were spotted in the distance, the drought would soon be over. And now we are going to read about Daniel and a dangerous sleepover. Daniel was an intelligent man who loved God. 3 times a day he would pray, "For the life I live, I thank you, Lord. Everything I have is yours." Daniel was appointed as advisor to the king of Babylon. He was more capable than the other advisors, so he was placed in charge of the entire kingdom. The other advisors were jealous and wanted to get Daniel in trouble with the king. They knew Daniel was a man of God who would pray, "For the life I live, I thank you, Lord. Everything I have is yours." So they advised the king to issue a decree that anyone who prays to any god or human other than the king be thrown into the lion's den. Daniel was distraught when he heard this. He went home and prayed, "For the life I live, I thank you, Lord. Everything I have is yours." One day, the advisors heard Daniel praying, so they ran straight to the king and reminded him of his decree. "Daniel pays no attention to you or the decree. He still prays to his God. For the life I live, I thank you, Lord. Everything I have is yours." King Darius was determined to rescue Daniel, but the advisors reminded him that the decree could not be undone. He had no choice. "May your God rescue you," he cried, as a stone was rolled over the mouth of the den. The sleeping lions awoke and became very interested in their new visitor. Daniel knew God would save him, so he prayed, "For the life I live, I thank you, Lord. Everything I have is yours." As morning came, King Darius hurried to the den. The stone was rolled away, and Daniel emerged without a scratch. The king was overjoyed. God had saved Daniel. A new decree was issued that everyone in Babylon must worship God and pray, "For the life I live, I thank you, Lord. Everything I have is yours." The end. David, Elijah, and Daniel were definitely very brave individuals. I hope you enjoyed reading about them. Join me next Friday for another story, and on Monday for plenty more iSingPOP fun. Good night, everyone. Sleep well.